All right, welcome everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Definitely. Always ready to dig into some thought-provoking stuff.
Today we're going to explore this text, Divine Fusion 101. It's all about language, personal growth, healing, all that good stuff.
Interesting combo.
Yeah, right. The basic idea is that the words we use, they're not just about communicating. They're like intertwined with our intentions, desires, and even how we grow as people.
Okay. I'm intrigued. I mean, we've all felt that, right? Like words have power.
Exactly. So this deep dive, it might change how you think about what you say.
And maybe what you think too.
Absolutely. So Divine Fusion 101 kicks off with this idea of the root. It's like the core of who we are, where all our words and thoughts come from. And it's shaped by everything we've experienced, good and bad.
So it's like more than just knowing a bunch of words.
Right. This root is like the foundation.
Yeah, the bedrock. We build our language on it, and in a way, our whole reality.
That's a powerful thought.
And the text takes it even further, comparing this root to our unconscious mind. Yeah. It's saying that down there in the root, we might be holding on to stuff from way back, early experiences, maybe even traumas.
And that's affecting how we think and act, even if we don't realize it.
Exact.
That reminds me of how we all start life without words, right?
Mhm.
Just sounds.
Yeah.
Makes you think about how learning language, learning to actually name things, how that shapes our whole view of the world.
Totally. It's like language becomes the lens we see everything through.
Lens, yeah.
And what Divine Fusion 101 suggests is that part of growing, really growing as a person, is about unraveling those perceptions we formed through that lens.
Unraveling. I like that word.
Questioning all those assumptions and beliefs that might be holding us back. Like, where did those even come from?
So are there specific examples in the text about how the language we used early on or the language used around us, how that creates these limiting beliefs?
Oh, yeah, definitely. One example they give is that classic phrase, be quiet, often said to kids.
Yeah, be quiet, be quiet.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's usually well-intentioned, right?
Mm.
But the text says that hearing that over and over, it could lead to a child, suppressing their voice as they grow up.
Their needs, their true selves, all of that.
Exactly. So Divine Fusion 101 offers all these exercises and techniques, ways to identify those ingrained patterns, those things that came from our early experiences with language.
All goes back to that root, right?
Yeah, totally.
Like language is built on top of it, and by figuring out our language, we can start to understand the root itself.
Exactly. And getting to know that root, that's a key to growth and healing, according to this text.
So how do we do that? What does the text say?
Well, it emphasizes two things: willingness and patience.
Willingness and patience.
Yeah, being open to facing those hard truths about ourselves
Yeah.
and understanding that real change, it takes time and effort.
I think a lot of people struggle with that patience part.
Oh, absolutely. We live in a world of instant gratification.
Right. We want quick fixes for everything.
But real healing, the kind that really changes us deep down, that takes a different approach. It takes being present with the discomfort.
Yeah, allowing ourselves the space to, process and grow without judging ourselves.
And that's where gratitude comes in.
Gratitude.
Yeah, Divine Fusion 101 talks about this beautiful connection between patience and gratitude.
Interesting.
It says that by practicing patience, giving ourselves time and space to heal, we naturally start to feel grateful.
Okay, I see
And
that.
that gratitude helps us bridge the gap between our conscious and unconscious minds.
Which then leads to more self-awareness, and that helps the healing process.
Exactly. It all connects.
There's this one line from the text that really stuck with me. Words have the ability to shape and build upon one's reality. Wow, it makes you think about how much weight our words carry, right?
Absolutely. And not just in how they affect other people.
But how they shape our own experiences too.
Yeah, it's a reminder that our words aren't just empty sounds. They have energy, intention. They can manifest things.
So we need to choose them carefully.
Divine Fusion 101 encourages us to use words consciously, both spoken and thought.
As tools for transformation and healing.
Exactly.
So big picture, the takeaway from Divine Fusion 101 seems to be that our words are way more than just a way to communicate.
They're a reflection of who we are, our root. And they have the power to shape our reality.
That's a powerful thought to leave us with.
And that brings us to a final question for you all to ponder. If your words can shape reality, what kind of world do you want to create with them? What kind of reality for yourself and everyone around you? Think about it.
That's something worth reflecting on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure.
All right, so welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at this really interesting text. It's called Divine Fusion 101.
Okay.
And it's about healing and harmony, but maybe not in the way that you might be thinking about it right off the bat.
Right.
So this text kind of starts out with this idea that healing might actually be easier than staying in pain,
Oh, interesting.
which I know that sounds counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like when we think about healing, we often think about all this effort and struggle and all this,
Work
work.
involved.
But this text is saying that it might actually be more about aligning with our like natural flow and
Yep.
kind of releasing that resistance.
Oh, okay. I like that.
Yeah. So what do you think about that? Like, what is it about us that makes us resist healing, do you think?
The text, it talks a lot about fear, actually. Fear of the unknown, fear of change.
Oh,
And sometimes fear of, like, all the work,
Right. Right.
And it uses this really cool analogy about a treacherous path.
Okay.
So imagine you're, like, walking along this really, really difficult, treacherous path. It's, like, really hard. It's all rocky. There's thorns, whatever,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But you know that up ahead, there's this smoother, easier path.
Okay.
Right? Like you can see it, but fear like keeps you clinging to that old familiar path,
Oh.
even though it's hurting you, right?
Right.
Because it's familiar, it's what you know.
So it's almost like we become attached to our pain in
Yeah.
a way.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Like we develop these coping mechanisms, these identities,
Right.
and it's all based on our experiences,
Yeah.
and sometimes those experiences are really painful.
Right. And that becomes part of, who we think we are.
Exactly.
Exactly. So then this text is kind of challenging us to really look at that and say, okay, are these patterns that we've developed,
Right.
are they really serving us?
Yeah.
Or are they just keeping us,
Are they holding us back?
holding us back from, like a more expansive way of being?
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think that's where
Yeah.
this whole idea of pain being necessary for evolution comes in.
Right. Right. Because the text also talks about this too.
Yes.
And it even suggests that like a world without pain, it might actually hinder our growth, which is, again,
That's a really
kind of a crazy idea, right?
Yeah, it is what it makes you think,
Yeah.
Like, imagine a world, just imagine, where there's no challenges,
Yeah.
no obstacles. Like,
Okay.
would we even develop resilience,
Right.
compassion, the drive to learn and grow?
Yeah. Would we even have
Yeah,
like the motivation to do anything, really,
exactly.
if everything was just handed to us and it was all easy?
Right, exactly. And
Wow.
so I think that what this text is arguing is that these challenges and
Mhm.
even pain, they're actually essential for our spiritual evolution. Like it's what pushes us to tap into this inner strength
Right.
and expand our capacity for empathy.
Right.
And it ultimately leads us to greater wisdom.
So it's not about avoiding pain,
Right.
but it's about understanding its purpose
Right.
and learning from those experiences.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like this big perspective shift.
It is. It is. And, the text talks about this idea of something called limited perception.
Oh, yeah.
So what exactly does that mean?
So limited perception, it basically describes this this state where we're kind of unaware of our true nature and how everything's interconnected. It's like, think about it. We're all conditioned from the time we're, born, by our upbringing, our experiences.
And everything, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that conditioning,
Mhm.
it can really lead to this limited understanding of ourselves and our true energetic nature.
So we're essentially seeing the world through like a distorted lens
Exactly.
and not really seeing things for what they are.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that's where this whole idea of divine fusion comes in.
Oh, okay. So tell me about that. What is divine fusion?
So divine fusion, it's like this state of wholeness and harmony
Okay.
that the text is guiding you towards, right?
Correct.
And it really involves recognizing that everything's interconnected.
Okay.
Like our mind, body, emotions, spirit,
Yeah.
and it's about dissolving this illusion of separation that we have.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So
That's what this text is calling divine fusion.
exactly.
Okay. So and it sounds like the text is saying that this divine fusion is kind of the key to unlocking true healing and harmony.
Yeah.
So how does it guide us towards that?
So the text really emphasizes self-healing
Okay.
as this pathway to both personal power and lasting peace.
Yeah.
But it also kind of highlights this really crucial distinction,
Okay.
which is it aims not to teach harmony,
Mm.
but to help us actually perceive it directly.
Oh, okay. So how does it do that?
So it really emphasizes the importance of exploring our subconscious,
Okay. Yeah.
because that's
Well,
where
that's where the stuff is, right? All
exactly.
the limiting beliefs and
Yeah, all this stuff,
all the bag.
all the baggage we carry,
Mhm.
our emotional blocks, all that.
Yeah.
And so the text guides you through all these different exercises
Right.
like journaling, meditation, dream
Uh,
analysis, and it's all meant to help you bring these subconscious patterns to
okay.
light.
Yeah, to make you more aware of them, so you
Exactly.
can actually work with them.
Exactly.
So then that journey into the subconscious, right? Is it just a matter of time? Like, will this stuff eventually just
Right.
come out on its own?
That
Or
that's a really great question.
yeah.
And the text actually poses that.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Like, are we just passively waiting for healing to happen?
No.
Or are we actively engaging with our inner world
It's-
and making these choices
Right.
to support our growth?
So it's about taking an active role in our healing.
Exactly.
Yeah, and not just waiting for it to happen to us.
Right.
Okay. Now this is where things get really interesting
Okay.
because the text takes kind of a turn, and it links sexual energy to this whole concept of harmony.
Right.
And it suggests that that our sexual energy actually holds keys
Mm-hmm.
to perceiving this divine fusion, which is just
It's a fascinating concept, isn't it?
it is.
Yeah.
So tell me more about that. How does our sexual energy
Yeah.
connect to all of this?
So, that's where this whole idea of illusion of fusion comes in.
Okay.
So when we separate our sexual energy or root energy, as the text calls it,
Mm-hmm.
from our heart and our mind,
Okay.
we're actually creating this fragmented experience of ourselves.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And that separation, it leads to this illusion of fusion
Yeah.
where we might appear whole
Which
on
is
the
like-
surface.
Right.
But there's like this deeper integration that's missing.
Oh, okay. So what would be like a real world example of that? Like, what would that look like?
Well, you can think of someone who's maybe very, very successful in their career,
Okay.
right? Like they're making tons of money, they've got all the external validation, but they feel deeply unfulfilled in their
Yeah.
personal life,
Yeah.
They might have all this material wealth, but they lack this sense of inner connection
Okay.
and purpose.
So they're achieving, but they're not really fulfilled.
Exactly.
Okay. And that's because of this disconnection from their root energy.
Yeah, and so that can lead to this feeling of,
Okay.
emptiness,
Right.
completeness.
Yeah, like something's missing,
Exactly. Yeah.
even though on the surface it looks like they have it all.
Right, exactly.
Okay. So then how do we overcome that?
So the text, it guides you through this process of
Okay.
gently exploring this energy without judgment,
Mm-hmm.
like allowing to flow
Okay.
freely through your whole being.
So it's about integrating that root energy with our heart and our mind,
Exactly.
become a more whole person.
Yeah, it's like this beautiful integration
Yeah.
of all these different aspects
Right.
of ourselves.
Wow. Okay. Well, this has been a really insightful deep dive, I got to say.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
Yeah, this text, Divine Fusion 101,
Mm-hmm.
it really does offer this unique perspective on healing. And it emphasizes self-awareness, the importance of facing our inner challenges,
Right.
and then this unexpected connection between our sexual energy and
Right.
the pursuit of harmony.
It's all connected.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not about forcing anything,
Right.
right? It's about cultivating this awareness
Mm-hmm.
and allowing that natural process of healing to unfold.
Exactly.
So then the question becomes, if this root energy
Mm.
holds these keys to harmony,
Right.
how do we begin to explore and integrate it
You're right.
in a safe and conscious way?
That's
And that's really, I think,
the big question.
the journey, right?
Yeah.
That we all have to kind of go on our own.
Right. And I think this text, Divine Fusion 101, it offers a starting point.
Okay,
But
but it's up to us
yeah,
to do the work.
exactly.
Yeah, so keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deeper.
Keep diving deeper.
Until next time on The Deep Dive. All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into something pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
It's this text called Divine Fusion 101,
Okay.
and it's all about the connection between humans and animals.
Interesting.
Yeah, and sort of looking at that through a spiritual lens.
Oh, okay.
And, it really gets you thinking about,
Mm.
are we, just another species on this planet?
Right.
Or is there something that sets us apart,
Yeah.
from the rest of the animal kingdom?
Yeah, that's a big question, right?
It is a big question, and this text dives right into it. So
Okay.
it makes this pretty bold statement right off the bat.
Okay.
It says that no animal, no matter how intelligent,
Hmm.
will ever reach the level of consciousness that we have as humans.
Wow.
So I'm curious, what makes human consciousness so special?
Right. So the text dives into this idea of knowing and awareness.
Yeah.
And it says that it's not just about intelligence, it's about understanding the why behind things.
Okay.
So, like, they give this example of fire. An animal might learn to avoid fire because it burns.
Right.
But humans, we discovered, the chemical process of combustion.
Right. We figured out how to make fire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We understand the underlying principle, the why behind it.
Yeah.
And that's what the text really points to as being this key difference.
So if we've got this deeper understanding, does that mean we're better than animals?
Well, the text doesn't necessarily present it as a hierarchy.
Okay.
It's more about just like a different way of experiencing the world.
Gotcha.
So it describes animals as these living symbols,
Okay.
representing like the cycles of the earth.
Okay, so when we think of a lion, we think of strength,
Sass.
or a fox, and we think of cunning.
Yeah.
They represent these kind of bigger ideas.
Yeah, throughout history, we've used these animal metaphors
Right.
to make sense of the world.
Like in myths and stories and things.
Exactly, like ancient myths, folklore, even modern psychology.
Interesting.
They all draw on these animal symbols to explain human behavior and motivations.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I've always been drawn to wolves.
Oh, yeah.
Their pack mentality and just the way they navigate the world. It's just
It's fascinating.
fascinating. Yeah. Do you think there's something to that?
Mm-mm.
Like our affinity for certain animals?
Yeah, I mean, the text definitely suggests there might be. It
Correct.
doesn't like give you a specific meaning for each animal,
Right.
but it encourages you to think about it.
Okay.
Like, what qualities does that animal embody?
Mhm.
Why does that resonate with you?
Mhm.
Maybe there's a connection to your own values or
Right.
aspirations or something like that.
I like that.
Yeah.
Now, there's this other thing I wanted to ask you about.
Okay.
This idea of the eternal cycle.
Right.
The text is a little cryptic about it.
Yeah, it's pretty abstract.
Yeah. But it seems to be saying that humans can perceive this reality that's beyond just the physical world.
Yeah, so it doesn't explicitly define what the eternal cycle is, but it seems to imply a deeper understanding of life and death and the interconnectedness of everything.
Okay.
So, like, think of concepts like reincarnation
Oh,
or the cyclical nature of the seasons.
right. Nature kind of repeats itself.
Exactly. And these are ideas that humans have thought about for centuries,
Yeah.
trying to make sense of it all.
It's a big one.
It was a big one.
And the text also says that science can be a tool for understanding this eternal cycle.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, it seems kind of contradictory, right?
Yeah.
Like using logic and observation to explore something beyond the physical.
It is kind of a paradox,
Yeah.
but I think it highlights the unique position that humans are in,
Okay.
where we're capable of both scientific inquiry
Mhm.
and deep spiritual contemplation.
Yeah. Maybe they're not so different after all.
Maybe not.
All right, so one last thing from the text before we wrap up.
Okay.
It makes this distinction between the evolution of an animal's soul
Okay.
and the metaphor that it represents. So even as a species evolves,
Yeah.
the symbolic meaning stays the same.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So does that mean the meaning exists independently of the animal?
Right.
Is there some kind of deeper blueprint at play?
That's a good question.
Yeah, and you think about it like the wise owl, the sly fox.
Mm.
Those metaphors, those appear across cultures throughout history.
Yeah, they do.
It's pretty wild.
It is pretty wild.
So where does that leave us?
Well, we've covered a lot
Yeah.
from the unique nature of human consciousness to animal symbolism and this whole idea of the eternal cycle.
Yeah, and it seems like the text is leaving us with a challenge.
I think so.
Like, humans might be the only ones who can see this bigger picture.
Yeah,
But what do we do with that?
exactly. It's like a responsibility.
Yeah, how do we use this understanding to live better lives?
Right.
and make sure our actions, reflect this deeper understanding of the world. Lots to think about.
Yeah, definitely gives you a new perspective.
It does. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a good one.
And for everyone listening, keep those questions in mind.
Yeah, and see where they take you.
Until next time.
See you then.
All right, so we're diving deep today, and I'm excited about this one.
Yeah.
We're looking at, a piece from Divine Fusion 101,
Okay.
which I got to say, that title alone, right? Divine Fusion. I was like, woo, what's that all about?
Yeah, it's a catchy one.
It is, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to, unpack some of these ideas. And I think, for our listeners, this is going to be one where you really got to kind of sit with it a little bit because some of it is pretty dense. But I think, as always, there's going to be some real gems in here for people. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. This excerpt, it starts off with a pretty bold statement.
Okay.
To believe is to not know. To know is to not believe. And that really struck me because, in this day and age where we're just bombarded with information all the time, it's like sometimes the more I read, the less certain I feel about anything.
Yeah, I think that's a really common experience these days, right? We have so much information at our fingertips, but the text is really getting at this idea, like, are we really understanding it? Or are we just kind of accumulating data points?
Yeah, it's like, you can read 1,000 articles about, I don't know, the history of the Roman Empire or something.
Right. Yeah.
But do you really, know it?
Do you really understand it and how it connects to everything else, too?
Exactly, yeah. So how do we cultivate that deeper knowing, that kind of root understanding, I think is how the text refers to it.
Right.
How do we, move beyond just sort of hoarding information and actually integrate it into our being, I guess.
Well, the text talks about direct experience, right? Like actually going out and experiencing things, not just reading about them. And also this idea of contemplation, really sitting with the information and reflecting on it.
Okay, so it's not passive. It's not just reading and then moving on to the next thing.
Right. Yeah. It's about actively engaging with it and asking yourself those tough questions like, what does this really mean? How does this apply to my life?
I like that. Now, another thing that really jumped out at me in this excerpt was this idea of external versus internal power.
Okay.
And it says, let's see, accumulating external power does not mean one changes internally.
Yeah.
And I mean, on the one hand, I get it, right? Like just because you achieve success in the outer world doesn't necessarily mean you've grown as a person.
Right.
But I mean, isn't there value in achieving things,
Yeah.
in the material world, in our careers, in our relationships? How do we reconcile those two ideas?
I don't think the text is saying that external achievements are meaningless, right? It's more about recognizing that true evolution, real growth, it comes from the inside out.
Okay.
Yeah, it's great to have a successful career, but if you're doing it at the expense of your well-being or your relationships or your own internal sense of peace, then maybe it's not really serving you.
So it's about making sure your actions are aligned with your values, your internal state.
Yeah, exactly. It's like imagine someone who's, really into fitness.
Right.
And they buy all the fancy workout gear, the latest gadgets.
The Peloton, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. But they never actually work out.
Oh, I know a few people like that.
Yeah, right. So they've got all the external trappings of someone who's fit and healthy, but they haven't actually changed their habits or their lifestyle.
Yeah, it's like walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly.
Okay, so now let's get into something that I know a lot of our listeners are going to find interesting, to say the least.
All right.
And this is where the text talks about this idea of Earth moving out of a masculine energy cycle and into a feminine energy cycle.
Right.
And I can already hear some people being like, what? Hold on a second. What does that even mean? So can you break that down for us a little bit?
Sure. And I think it's important to remember that the text is using masculine and feminine energies in a metaphorical sense, right? It's not about gender stereotypes, but rather these broader qualities or archetypes.
Okay.
So the text describes masculine energy as being more outward focused, very action oriented, emphasizing things like achievement, competition, that kind of thing.
Okay.
While feminine energy is more inward focused, more receptive, intuitive, collaborative.
So it's not about men versus women.
No, not at all.
It's about these different energies that we all have within us.
Exactly. And this shift, this transition the text is talking about, it suggests that we might see a greater emphasis on things like interconnectedness, empathy, inner exploration, kind of a move away from that hyper-individualistic go-getter mentality that's been so dominant for so long.
So it's not that we're all going to ditch our suits for yoga pants or anything,
Right.
but maybe we'll see a shift in values and priorities on a societal level.
Yeah, exactly. And this brings us to a really important point that the text makes, which is that there are powers, and I'm using that term broadly here, that might try to control how we perceive this energy shift.
Okay.
So, think about all the different narratives out there, right? In the media, in politics, all these voices vying for our attention, trying to tell us what to think, how to feel.
So even though there might be attempts to influence our perception of this shift, the text ultimately encourages us to embrace this change.
Yes, exactly. To see it as an opportunity for growth, for evolution, for creating a more balanced and harmonious world.
And that brings us back to that initial point about, information overload and the need for root understanding.
Right.
Because, we're constantly being bombarded with all these messages, and it's up to us to really discern, what's true for us, what resonates with our own inner knowing.
Absolutely. It's about developing that critical thinking, that ability to question the information we're being given and to form our own conclusions.
It's like being the captain of your own ship, right? You're navigating
Yeah.
through these choppy waters of information, and you got to trust your own compass, your own intuition to guide you.
Exactly. And the text really emphasizes that even though change can be challenging, it's an inherent part of life.
Right.
And it's often through those challenges, through those periods of upheaval, that we grow the most.
Yeah. It's like, a muscle, if you don't challenge it, it doesn't grow.
Right.
So I think to kind of recap here, we've explored this idea of, moving beyond just surface level information, cultivating that root understanding, aligning our internal and external transformations, and this whole concept of this shifting energy and its potential impact on our individual lives and society as a whole.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack, for sure.
It is. But, as always, I think it's worth sitting with these ideas and seeing what resonates for you. So what are your biggest takeaways from this deep dive?
For me, it's really a call to be more mindful, more discerning, to really pay attention to the information I'm consuming, to the narratives that are shaping my worldview, and to remember that change is inevitable and we have a choice in how we respond to it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, a final thought for our listeners to ponder is, how can we apply these insights to our own lives, especially in this current moment where everything feels like it's in flux?
Right.
What does embracing change look like for you? What steps can you take to cultivate that root understanding? And how can you use these shifting energies to create a more fulfilling and meaningful life for yourself? We encourage you to continue exploring these ideas and to share your own interpretations. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye. All right, so we're diving into some pretty fascinating stuff today. Vulnerability, self-expression,
Yeah.
and like how we choose to present ourselves to the world, those sources you sent over. They got me thinking about this interesting tension.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like on the one hand, there's this deep human need to connect authentically, to be seen for who we really are, warts and all. But then,
We've got this whole other thing going on.
right, this fear of judgment, this instinct to protect ourselves,
Yeah.
especially when we feel like we're under a microscope.
It's almost like a paradox, right? Like wanting to be open and vulnerable, but also kind of terrified of what might happen if we actually are. And the sources definitely touch on that, especially when they bring up the role of the ego.
The ego.
Yeah, like one of the articles even called it the shadow self, the parts of ourselves we try to keep hidden, not just from others, but even from ourselves. It argues that, and I'm quoting here, to embrace vulnerability is to acknowledge the parts of ourselves we often try to keep hidden, both from the world and from ourselves.
Whoa. Okay, so, well, like, how does that actually play out in real life?
Well, think about it. We all have these inner struggles, right? Fears, insecurities, things we maybe don't want to admit to. But the sources suggest that it's in those dark places, those hidden corners, that we often find our greatest potential for growth and self-discovery.
So it's not about pretending everything's perfect. It's more about acknowledging the messiness, the complexities.
Exactly. And that's where creative expression comes in, like artists, musicians, writers. They often use their work to explore those raw, vulnerable parts of themselves.
Oh, totally. Like, that street artist we talked about, the one who does all those really powerful murals about social justice.
Yeah, the one who chooses to stay anonymous.
Right. That's a perfect example. Like, their art is so raw and honest. It clearly comes from a place of deep personal experience. And yet, they choose to remain hidden.
It's fascinating, right? Because it kind of begs the question, is it still vulnerability if it's not witnessed by
Yeah,
others?
that's a good point. Like, where's the line?
Well, the sources seem to suggest that the act of creation itself, the willingness to confront those difficult emotions and express them, that's where the vulnerability lies. Whether or not anyone else sees it is almost secondary.
Okay, I can see that. But what about when someone intentionally chooses to share their vulnerability with the world? Like, think about musicians who write songs about their heartbreak or their struggles with mental health. That feels different, doesn't it?
It does. And that's where things get even more complex. Because when we choose to be vulnerable with others, we open ourselves up to a whole range of possibilities.
Like connection.
Empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. But as one of the sources pointed out, there's also the risk of judgment, misunderstanding, even exploitation.
Whoa, yeah. It's almost like a risk-reward scenario.
Exactly. And this is where I think the digital age adds a whole other layer of complexity.
Oh, for sure. Like social media and all that. Yeah. We're constantly being observed, documented, analyzed. It's like this invisible audience is always there watching our every move. And I think that can make it even harder to be truly vulnerable, to let our guard down.
It's almost like we're all performing all the time, right? Trying to present this perfect curated version of ourselves.
It can feel that way, and that's why I think those sources are so important. They're reminding us that vulnerability isn't about weakness. It's about courage. It's about choosing to be authentic, even when it's scary.
So, like, where does that leave us? What are we supposed to do with all this?
Well, I think the sources offer some really valuable insights. They encourage us to approach vulnerability as a practice, something we cultivate and nurture, both within ourselves and in our relationships with others.
So it's not about being vulnerable all the time with everyone.
Right. It's about being intentional. It's about understanding our own motivations and fears and making conscious choices about how and with whom we choose to share ourselves.
That makes sense. It's like being mindful of the risks and rewards, knowing that sometimes it's okay to hold back to protect ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And other times it might be worth the risk to open up, to connect.
Exactly. And I think the real challenge, the one that really stuck with me from those sources, is this. How do we cultivate genuine vulnerability in a world that often rewards carefully curated personas?
That's deep.
Yeah, it is. And it's something I think we all need to grapple with. Like, how do we stay true to ourselves in a world that's constantly telling us to be something else? How do we find the courage to be real, to be vulnerable, even when it feels risky? That's the question, I think.
Yeah, that's a good one. Lots to think about. Thanks for diving into this with me. It's been thought-provoking for sure.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving deep into some pretty mind-blowing stuff.
I'm excited.
We're going to be exploring this book, Divine Fusion 101, The Science of Healing. And honestly, I've never come across a self-help book quite like this.
Really?
Yeah, it's like a wild mix of like unlocking your inner artist and healing old wounds.
Oh, that's interesting.
It all ties back to this idea of divine harmonic expressions, which we'll get to later.
Okay.
But essentially, it's all about how vulnerability and creativity can actually help us heal and, become the best versions of ourselves.
So, like, letting go and letting art lead the way.
Exactly. So let's jump right in. The book starts off with a concept that I found really surprising. Vulnerability being a strength. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it does seem counterintuitive at first, right? Like,
Right.
we're always told to be strong and put on a brave face.
Totally.
But the more I think about it, the more it makes sense.
Yeah.
Because to really grow, we have to be willing to let our guard down a bit.
So how does the book explain that connection? Like, how does being vulnerable actually make us stronger?
Well, the author, they argue that it's all about self-awareness. By being vulnerable, we're acknowledging the parts of ourselves that we might normally try to hide.
Oh, like the imperfections and insecurities.
Exactly. And, those are often the very things that hold us back.
I see, yeah.
So by facing them head on, we can start to understand them and work through them.
It's like shining a light on the stuff we usually keep in the shadows.
Yeah, and that can be scary, but it's also incredibly liberating.
Now, I know some people might be thinking, okay, vulnerability, sure, but isn't there a risk in being too vulnerable?
Right.
Like, how do we know how much to share And with whom?
Well, that's a really important point. And the
Okay.
author addresses it by emphasizing the need for safe spaces.
Okay, like what kind of spaces?
It could be therapy,
Uh-huh.
or a close friend or family member who you really trust, or even just journaling, having that conversation with yourself.
It's about choosing the right people and the right environments.
Absolutely. It's not about being vulnerable with everyone all the time. It's about being intentional and creating those safe containers where you can really explore your inner self.
So once we've kind of started to tap into that vulnerability, the book suggests that creative expression is the next step.
Right.
Why is that so important in this whole process?
Well, it's almost like vulnerability opens the door, and then creative expression helps us walk through it. You
Oh, I
know,
like that.
it gives us a way to express those emotions that we've been holding on to, maybe even for years, and to do it in a way that feels safe and empowering.
So it's not just about talking about our feelings, it's about finding a different way to express them.
Exactly. It could be anything, really. Painting, music, writing, dance, anything that allows you to connect with yourself on a deeper level.
This reminds me of something I read about art therapy, how it can be so helpful for people who have experienced trauma or have difficulty expressing themselves verbally. Have you ever seen that in action?
Oh, absolutely. I've worked with people who have found incredible healing through art. It's amazing to see how, someone who might struggle to put their feelings into words can suddenly find a voice through painting or sculpting.
Yeah. It's like those emotions finally have an outlet.
It's beautiful, really. And I think, even if we haven't experienced major trauma, we all have stuff that we're carrying around, and finding a creative outlet can help us process those emotions in a healthy way.
Okay, so we've talked about vulnerability, creative expression, and now the book dives into these three pillars of transformation: presence, self-acceptance, and embracing vulnerability. Again, why are these three so important?
It's like they build upon each other, creating this upward spiral of growth. Presence helps us become more aware of our thoughts and emotions, but without judgment. And that non-judgmental awareness makes it easier to accept ourselves, flaws and all.
Okay, so presence first.
Yeah, presence is key. And then the more we accept ourselves, the more comfortable we become with being vulnerable.
It's like a chain reaction.
Exactly. And as we become more vulnerable, we deepen our self-awareness, which leads to even greater presence and acceptance. It's a beautiful cycle.
It sounds great in theory, but I think a lot of people struggle with actually putting these concepts into practice. Like, how do we go beyond just understanding them to actually living them?
Well, I think the key is to start small. Don't try to overhaul your entire life overnight. Just pick one small thing you can do each day to cultivate presence, self-acceptance, or vulnerability.
Give me an example.
Sure. For presence, it could be as simple as taking a few minutes each day to just sit and focus on your breath, or paying attention to the sensations in your body.
Just being mindful, right?
Exactly. For self-acceptance, it could be challenging those negative thoughts that pop up and replacing them with positive affirmations, or celebrating your accomplishments, even the small ones.
And for vulnerability.
It could be sharing something personal with a trusted friend or therapist, or even just journaling about your feelings without censoring yourself.
That's like taking baby steps.
Yeah, and over time, those baby steps can lead to big changes. It's
Wow.
about building those muscles, the muscles of presence, self-acceptance, and vulnerability.
Okay, so now let's finally get to these divine harmonic expressions that the book keeps mentioning.
Right.
What exactly are they, and how do they fit into this whole picture?
Think of it as a state of alignment within yourself and with the world around you.
Hmm, that's interesting.
It's not something you achieve overnight. It's a process, a journey, and it's the culmination of everything we've been talking about. The vulnerability, the creative expression, the presence, the self-acceptance. It all leads to this state of harmony and healing.
Okay, so it's like the ultimate goal.
In a way, yes. But it's also something that we can experience in moments, even before we've fully achieved it. And the book breaks it down into 5 key components:
Not components. Yeah.
authenticity, intention, creativity, harmony, and healing. And they all kind of work together,
Like a cycle.
Exactly. By being authentic, we clarify our intentions. And those intentions fuel our creativity. And that creative energy helps us establish greater harmony within ourselves and with others. And ultimately, all of that leads to a state of healing and wholeness.
So it's like a snowball effect. Each element builds upon the previous one.
Exactly. And it's not always a linear process. There might be times when we feel like we're taking a step back. But as long as we keep moving forward, even if it's just a little bit each day, we'll eventually get there.
It's a journey, not a destination, right?
Exactly.
And it seems like creative expression plays a really big role in navigating that journey.
Absolutely. It helps us connect with our deepest selves, process our emotions, and transform our experiences into something meaningful.
It's like art becomes a tool for healing.
Yes, and it's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always beauty to be found.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I have one final question for you. If someone is listening to this and they're feeling inspired, what's one creative act they can do today to start moving towards that sense of harmony and healing?
I would say just start somewhere. Pick up a pen and write. Turn on some music and dance. Go for a walk in nature and pay attention to the beauty around you.
Just do something.
Exactly. And don't worry about being good at it. Just let yourself express whatever comes up. You might be surprised by what you discover.
That's a great point. It's not about perfection. It's about expression. So to recap, vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness. Creative expression is a powerful tool for healing and transformation. And divine harmonic expressions represent that state of alignment and wholeness that we can all achieve. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. I hope it inspires you to experiment with these ideas and see what kind of magic you can create in your own life.
I hope so too.
And who knows, maybe we'll see some of your divine harmonic expressions out in the world
It
soon.
would be amazing.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep creating, and keep healing. Okay, so we're diving deep today into something that's been really intriguing me, this whole concept of Divine Fusion 101.
Divine Fusion 101, huh? Sounds intense.
It kind of is.
Mm.
I was looking at this excerpt, and it talks about accepting those darkest aspects of ourselves, the stuff we usually try to keep hidden. But it doesn't just say, oh, acknowledge it and move on. It goes deeper, talking about integration, and even, get this, sacrificing the ego.
Whoa, okay. So not exactly light reading then. Where do we even start with something like that?
All right, so maybe we break it down. What does divine fusion even mean?
Well, it's definitely not your typical self-help jargon. It's not just about slapping a positive affirmation on things. It seems to be about taking those darker parts, the ones we might want to ignore or pretend aren't there, and actually making them part of who we are, like whisking them into the fabric of our being.
And that's where I get tripped up. Integration. Isn't that like saying those negative qualities are good? Doesn't that go against, well, everything we've been taught about self-improvement?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. We're always told to focus on the positive, right?
Right.
But what if those less desirable parts, those so-called darkest aspects, actually serve a purpose? What if they hold a key to understanding ourselves more fully?
Okay. So it's not about condoning bad behavior or anything, but maybe understanding what those aspects tell us about the bigger picture.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that those darkest aspects, well, they're part of the whole. They're part of what makes us human.
Okay, I'm starting to see that.
Yeah.
But why divine? What makes this whole fusion process divine?
Ah, good question. Divine suggests a connection to something bigger than ourselves, right?
Right.
A higher power, maybe, or a universal consciousness, even our own deepest wisdom.
Yeah.
Different cultures and spiritual traditions have different names for it, but the idea is that when we integrate our light and shadow selves, we become more aligned with this larger force.
So does that mean we become more, I don't know, whole?
Complete pie? Exactly. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, talked about the shadow self. He believed that facing those hidden aspects leads to a deeper sense of wholeness and psychological integration. Think of it like putting together a puzzle. You can't just ignore the pieces you don't like. They're all essential for completing the picture.
I like that, the puzzle analogy. Okay, so divine points to this bigger picture, and fusion is about bringing those different parts of ourselves together, the light and the shadow.
Mm-hmm.
But what about 101? Does it suggest there's like a textbook for all of this? A divine fusion for beginners course?
Mm-hmm. I wish. No, but 101 suggests it's about foundational understanding, the basic principles of this concept that pop up across different spiritual and philosophical traditions.
Got it. So it's not something brand new, but a universal idea with deep roots. The excerpt I mentioned earlier talks about a sacrifice of ego
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to being vulnerable. That sounds pretty intense.
Yeah. Definitely not your feel-good affirmation stuff. What do you think they meant by that?
Well, I think it connects to how hard it can be to truly be vulnerable, to show ourselves flaws and all.
Absolutely. In many traditions, the ego wants to protect us from pain and discomfort. It wants to keep up a certain image, a facade. It's terrified of vulnerability because that means exposing our true selves, the good, the bad, the messy.
So we have to let go of that ego's control to really engage in this divine fusion process.
Right. It's about surrendering to the process, even if it's scary or uncomfortable. That's where vulnerability comes in. Remember, the excerpt calls vulnerability the key. What do you think that is?
Well, it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable.
It does.
Think about those moments in your life that truly shaped you, the ones that really changed who you are. Weren't those often moments of deep vulnerability?
Absolutely. Those times when we let our guard down, when we allow ourselves to be truly seen, even if it hurts, those experiences, the joyful ones and the painful ones, become the raw materials for this divine fusion process.
Wow, I hadn't thought of it that way. So it's about saying yes to all of it, the good, the bad, the messy. But how do we actually do that? What does vulnerability look like in practice?
It's different for everyone, but it often starts with honesty. Being honest with ourselves about what we're feeling, what we're afraid of, what we try to hide from ourselves and others.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Journaling can be a powerful tool for that. Meditation can help us become more aware of our thoughts and feelings. And therapy provides a safe and guided space to explore our inner world.
So it's not about just like spilling all our secrets to everyone,
Right.
but about cultivating a deeper awareness and acceptance of ourselves, warts and all.
Exactly. It's about turning inwards, getting to know ourselves on a deeper level. And then that awareness and acceptance, it ripples outwards. It influences our relationships, how we connect with others, how we move through the world.
So we've covered a lot here. Divine Fusion 101 seems to be about embracing all parts of ourselves, the light and the shadow, and using vulnerability as the key to integrating those parts into a larger sense of self and purpose.
It really does. And that brings up a pretty big question. If we succeed in this integration, where does it lead us? What's the ultimate goal?
That's the real mystery, isn't it?
Yeah. Could it be that by embracing our shadow selves and connecting to something bigger, we unlock a deeper level of wholeness and compassion, a deeper connection to ourselves and to others?
It's definitely something to think about. Listeners, what darkest aspects are you ready to explore? How can you approach those parts of yourself with curiosity and self-compassion? This divine fusion, it's not about achieving perfection. It's about embracing the fullness of who we are. And who knows, maybe that's where the real magic lies.
Maybe it is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been quite a journey. Until next time, keep exploring.
And keep integrating.